I'm Margaret. I'm 72 years old, and sweetheart, let me tell you something that'll knock your socks off. For the past 2.5 years, I've been pretending to lose my eyesight, and it's been the most eye-opening experience of my entire life, if you'll pardon the irony. Before I tell you how I exposed my own family's shocking betrayal, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell notification. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this incredible story ends. Every single morning, I put on these thick sunglasses, grab my walking stick, and act like I can barely see past my own nose. But the truth is, I can see everything crystal clear, especially the ugly truth about what my own family was planning to do to me. Sometimes the best way to see people's true colors is to let them think you can't see at all. It all started when I was visiting my daughter Sarah in Phoenix about 3 years ago. I was staying in her guest room, recovering from minor hip surgery, when I overheard her on the phone with my grandson Tyler. She was talking about me like I was some kind of burden, saying things like, "Mom's getting too old to handle her own affairs," and "We need to step in before she makes any stupid financial decisions." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, like I was already gone. It cut me deeper than any surgeon's knife ever could. Here I was, a woman who had raised 5 kids, run a successful bakery for 30 years, and still balanced my own checkbook every month. But instead of marching out there and giving them a piece of my mind, something told me to be smart about this situation. My late husband Bob used to say I was too trusting for my own good, and maybe it was time to prove him wrong. So I started researching vision problems online, watching YouTube videos about how people with macular degeneration behave, practicing walking with a cane in my own backyard when nobody was looking. I turned myself into a student of blindness, learning every detail so I could play this role perfectly. The hardest part wasn't learning to act blind. It was having to watch my own family plot against me and pretend I didn't know what was happening. I watched Tyler go through my purse when he thought I couldn't see, saw Sarah making copies of my important documents, heard whispered phone conversations that stopped the moment I walked into the room. Every day brought new betrayals, but I kept my mouth shut and played the part of a confused old lady who needed help finding her reading glasses. I became the grandmother they apparently wanted, helpless, dependent, and supposedly clueless about their schemes. What they didn't realize was that my deteriorating vision was actually giving me supervision of their every move. When I'd accidentally knock over my coffee cup, I was really checking to see if they'd moved any of my paperwork. When I asked them to help me read my mail, I was studying their faces for signs of guilt. My fake blindness became like having a secret superpower. It made me invisible to their conscience and allowed me to gather evidence with perfect clarity. I was like an undercover detective in my own family, and they had no clue they were being investigated. Can you imagine discovering your own family plotting against you? Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if you found out your children were planning to betray you? 3 weeks after I started my vision problems, Tyler offered to drive me to what he called a routine eye exam in downtown Phoenix. I should have known something was fishy when he insisted on coming inside with me. But I played along, shuffling slowly with my cane and squinting at everything. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Tyler kept checking his phone nervously, and when the receptionist called my name, he practically jumped out of his chair. "I'll help Grandma Margaret," he said, taking my arm like I was made of glass. That's when I knew this wasn't about my eyes at all. Dr. Harrison looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact. Tyler positioned himself right next to the doctor's desk, and I could feel the tension in the room like electricity before a storm. "Now, Mrs. Patterson," the doctor began, "your grandson has expressed some concerns about your cognitive abilities." The way he said it, so clinical and cold, made my skin crawl. But then Tyler opened his mouth and dear, what came out nearly knocked me off that examination table. "Doctor, she's been doing really strange things lately. Last week she tried to write a check for groceries but couldn't remember how to spell 50. She keeps asking me the same questions over and over. Every word was a carefully crafted lie, delivered with fake concern that would make any grandmother's heart break. I wanted to stand up right then and tell them both what I really thought. But something deeper told me to stay quiet and let them hang themselves with their own rope. Dr. Harrison nodded along like he was listening to a weather report, scribbling notes. "And her financial management?" he asked, not even looking at me. Tyler leaned forward eagerly like a vulture circling fresh roadkill. "She's been making terrible decisions, Doctor. Last month she almost gave $5,000 to some phone scammer. Another complete fabrication. I had never in my life fallen for a phone scam, and Tyler knew it. In fact, I was the one who taught him how to spot scammers when he was just 16. The worst part came when Dr. Harrison asked, "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here?" And Tyler, my own flesh and blood, looked him straight in the eye and said, "We need documentation for a conservatorship hearing. My grandmother needs someone to take control of her finances before she hurts herself." The casual way he said it, like he was ordering coffee, made my stomach turn. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about controlling me. They weren't trying to help an elderly woman. They were trying to legally steal everything I'd worked for my entire life. I sat there in that cold chair, sunglasses hiding the tears threatening to spill, and realized I wasn't just dealing with greedy grandchildren anymore. This was a full-scale conspiracy to rob me of my independence, my dignity, and my life savings. When I got home from that appointment, I knew I had to become a detective in my own house. The very next morning I drove to Best Buy. Yes, sweetheart, I drove myself there, dark sunglasses and all, and bought 3 small recording devices that the young clerk assured me were practically invisible. I told him I was a mystery writer working on a novel about elderly people, and he was so helpful. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a supposedly blind woman, learning to use spy equipment to catch my own family, red-handed. Installing those recording devices was like playing the most dangerous game of hide-and-seek imaginable. I placed one behind my antique china cabinet, another under the coffee table, and the third in my bedroom, behind a picture frame of my late husband Bob. Every time someone came to visit, I'd shuffle around with my cane, pretending to be lost and confused, while secretly checking to make sure my little electronic witnesses were still in place. The hardest part was remembering to act helpless when I felt more empowered than I had in years. The first real evidence came just 3 days later, when Sarah brought her friend Linda over for coffee. I was supposedly napping when Sarah started talking about me, like I was already in the grave. "Mom's definitely losing it, Linda. Yesterday she put the milk in the cupboard and the cereal in the refrigerator." Another complete lie. I had done no such thing. But Linda seemed uncomfortable. "Are you sure, Sarah? Your mother seemed perfectly sharp when she helped me with my tax questions last month." That's when Sarah's voice got cold. "Trust me, the cognitive test next week will prove everything we need for the court case." But the conversation that really made my blood boil happened when Tyler brought his girlfriend Jessica over for dinner. I was in the kitchen, supposedly struggling to make sandwiches, when they started talking about dividing up my belongings like I was already dead. "I definitely want the antique jewelry," Jessica said, like she was shopping at a garage sale. "And that dining room set would look perfect in our new apartment." Tyler laughed and said, "Don't worry, babe. Once we get the conservatorship, we can sell whatever we don't want. The house alone should give us enough money to pay off all our debts and take that trip to Europe." They were literally planning their vacation with my money, while I was standing 10 feet away, making them dinner. What shocked me most was discovering that they'd been documenting everything, taking photos of my confused moments, keeping fake journals, even recording videos when they thought I couldn't see them. I found Tyler's phone one day, and there were dozens of videos with titles like, "Grandma Can't Remember How to Use the TV Remote." The calculating nature of it all was breathtaking. They weren't just stealing from me. They were creating a fictional version of me to present to the court, a helpless old woman who couldn't take care of herself. The most damning evidence came from a phone call I recorded between Sarah and someone I couldn't identify at first. Sarah was talking about speeding up the process because Mom's starting to ask too many questions about her bank statements. The voice on the other end said, "Don't worry, I've got everything set up. The paperwork will show a clear pattern of cognitive decline." When I finally figured out who that voice belonged to, it felt like the ground had opened up beneath my feet. It was my own attorney, Richard Coleman, the man who had handled my husband's estate and whom I'd trusted for over 15 years. The conspiracy wasn't just family. It included the very people I'd paid to protect me. Are you as shocked as I was by their betrayal? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to deal with family members who put money before love? The more I dug into their lives, the more I realized my family wasn't just greedy. They were desperate. And believe me, desperate people do desperate things. I found Tyler's credit card statement that he'd accidentally left on my kitchen counter. The boy owed over $47,000 across 5 different cards. But that wasn't the worst part. There were charges for DraftKings and FanDuel almost every single day. My grandson had become a gambling addict, betting away money he didn't have. Sarah's situation was even more heartbreaking. That successful real estate business she was always bragging about, she hadn't sold a house in over 8 months, and her fancy office was costing her $3,000 a month. She'd been living off credit cards, telling everyone that her inheritance from me would solve all her problems. And Marcus, my youngest grandson, who I'd always thought was the responsible one, he'd been fired 6 months ago for falsifying client records and had been too ashamed to tell anyone. Instead, he'd been pretending to go to work every day, sitting in coffee shops and sending fake emails. They'd been meeting every Tuesday at Sarah's house for family planning sessions. But thanks to my recording devices, I knew exactly what they were planning. They'd calculated that my house was worth $400,000. My savings had another $200,000, and my life insurance would pay out $500,000 when I died. Their plan was simple: get me declared incompetent, sell my house, put me in a facility, and divide the money between them to solve all their financial problems. Her name was Rosa Martinez, and she was supposed to be my watchdog, not my guardian angel. Sarah had hired her through a home care agency, telling me it was because "We're worried about you falling, Mom." But I knew the real reason. Rosa was there to document my every move. She was a small woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes and gentle hands, but I could tell she was observing everything I did. For the first 2 weeks, I played my part perfectly, bumping into furniture and asking her to help me find things that were right in front of me. But Rosa was smarter than my family gave her credit for. I started noticing little things, like how she'd rearrange my pill bottles in a specific order, or how she'd leave my reading glasses in the exact same spot every day. One afternoon, when I was supposedly napping, she walked in and whispered, "Mrs. Patterson, I know you can hear me. If you're pretending to be asleep, tap your finger once on the armrest." My heart nearly stopped. After a moment's hesitation, I tapped once. She sat down quietly and said, "I've been a nurse for 23 years, and I've never seen someone with vision problems who could perfectly avoid stepping on their cat's tail every single time." The conversation that followed changed everything. Rosa told me that Sarah had hired her specifically to document my cognitive decline and report back every week. "But Mrs. Patterson," she said, "you're the sharpest 72-year-old I've ever met. There's nothing wrong with your mind, and I suspect there's nothing wrong with your eyes either." When I finally took off my sunglasses and looked at her directly, the relief on her face was immediate. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you were too smart for this act to be real." Rosa had been keeping her own records of my family's behavior, and what she told me made my blood run cold. She'd overheard Tyler on the phone with someone called Jimmy the Shark, apparently his bookie, threatening to break his legs if he didn't pay up. Sarah had been rifling through my documents, photographing bank statements with her phone, and Marcus had actually asked Rosa if she knew anything about accelerating natural causes in elderly patients. But the most shocking revelation came when Rosa told me about the meeting she'd witnessed between Sarah and Dr. Harrison at a coffee shop. Your daughter offered him $10,000 to diagnose you with severe dementia. Mrs. Patterson. She said it needed to be convincing enough to hold up in court, and he agreed to do it. Rosa's voice shook as she continued. They're planning to have you committed within the next month, and Dr. Harrison promised to prescribe medications that would make you genuinely confused and docile. I've seen what those medications can do to people, and once they start you on them, there's no going back. That's when Rosa and I became partners in the most important mission of my life. She agreed to continue pretending to document my decline, while actually helping me gather evidence. We set up a system where she would warn me when someone was coming, and I would make sure my recording devices were activated. Most importantly, she helped me contact her sister-in-law, Elena, who happened to be one of the best elder law attorneys in Phoenix. The irony was delicious. They'd hired someone to spy on me, but instead, they'd given me the perfect inside source to expose their entire scheme. The trap was set for a Tuesday evening. Exactly 3 weeks after Rosa and I had become partners, Elena had coached us on exactly how to make this work legally. The plan was brilliant. We would stage a family meeting where I would appear heavily medicated and confused, giving them the perfect opportunity to discuss their plans openly. Rosa had obtained harmless props from her hospital contacts, IV bags filled with saline solution, and medical equipment that would make it look like I was receiving heavy sedation. But the real magic was in the recording devices Elena had provided, professional-grade equipment that would capture everything in crystal-clear audio. I spent the entire day preparing for the performance of my lifetime. Rosa helped me practice slurring my words and acting disoriented, but not so much that it would seem fake. We set up the living room like a medical staging area, with me lying on my recliner connected to fake IV lines. Elena positioned herself in the kitchen, supposedly there to discuss my care plan with the family, but really there to witness everything and make sure our evidence would hold up in court. When Sarah, Tyler, and Marcus arrived at 7 o'clock, they were practically giddy with excitement. They thought they were coming to discuss my final placement in a memory care facility, but they were actually walking into the most elaborate sting operation I'd ever orchestrated. "How is she today?" Sarah asked Rosa, speaking about me like I wasn't even in the room. Rosa played her part perfectly. She's been very confused since the new medication started. Dr. Harrison said this level of sedation should keep her calm during the transition. Within minutes, they were talking about me like I was already dead. "The memory care facility has an opening next Monday," Sarah announced. "They're charging $8,000 a month, but it won't matter once we sell the house." Marcus opened his laptop right there in my living room and started showing them real estate listings. "I found a buyer who's interested in a quick sale. We could have the house sold and the money divided within 60 days. Tyler was practically rubbing his hands together. "And once the conservatorship is finalized, we can start liquidating her other assets. That antique jewelry alone should bring in $30,000. They were dividing up my life like vultures, and they thought I was too drugged to understand what was happening. But the real confession came when Elena, pretending to be concerned about legal aspects, started asking probing questions. "Are you sure about the medical diagnosis? These conservatorship cases can be challenged." That's when Sarah really opened up. "Don't worry, we've got Dr. Harrison completely on board. He's being paid well enough to make sure his diagnosis is bulletproof. And if Mom tries to fight it, the medications will make sure she's too confused to testify." The final piece of evidence came when Marcus, feeling confident, started bragging about the details. "The best part is, once she's in the facility, we can gradually increase her medication dosage." He looked directly at my supposedly unconscious form and said, "Sorry, Grandma Margaret, but we need this money more than you need your independence." The casual cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. These weren't desperate people making a mistake. They were calculating criminals who had planned every detail of my destruction. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, just wait until you see what happens next, because I'm about to give them the shock of their lives. When I sat up in that chair and removed my sunglasses, The silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Tyler's phone slipped right out of his hands and crashed to the floor. Sarah's face went from smug satisfaction to absolute horror in about 2 seconds. Marcus actually stumbled backward and knocked over his laptop. "Hello, children," I said, my voice perfectly clear and strong. "I hope you enjoyed your little planning session, because I certainly did." The look of sheer terror in their eyes was worth every single day of pretending to be helpless. Rosa stepped forward from the kitchen doorway, holding up her phone with a satisfied smile. "Everything's been recorded, Mrs. Patterson. Every single word." Elena emerged from behind her, pulling out a legal briefcase. "And I'm Elena Rodriguez, Mrs. Patterson's attorney. I've been documenting this entire conversation for the past hour." Tyler tried to stammer something about this being a setup, but Elena cut him off. "Oh, it absolutely was a setup. And you walked right into it by confessing to conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft of nearly $1 million in assets." Sarah was the first to try to salvage the situation, her voice shaking. "Mom, we can explain everything. We were just trying to protect you." I stood up slowly, pulling the fake IV needle out of my arm. "Protect me? By bribing a doctor to diagnose me with dementia? By planning to drug me into submission? By selling my house and stealing my life savings?" Each question hit them like a physical blow. Marcus tried to approach me. "Grandma Margaret, you don't understand. We're in serious trouble." But I wasn't finished. I walked over to my dining room table and picked up a thick manila folder that Elena had prepared. "You want to know what I understand, Marcus? I understand that you've been lying to your pregnant wife about being fired. I understand that Tyler has a gambling addiction that's put him $47,000 in debt. And I understand that Sarah has been using my address for her failing business." The color drained from their faces as I laid out each of their secrets. Elena opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "We have recorded conversations dating back 6 weeks, photographic evidence of your conspiracy, and testimony about the bribery attempt with Dr. Harrison." Tyler finally found his voice. "You can't use those recordings in court. You recorded us without our consent." Elena smiled coldly. "Actually, in Arizona, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Your grandmother consented to recording conversations in her own home." The next morning, I was sitting in Elena's law office, signing the most satisfying documents of my entire life. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Elena asked me one final time. "Once we file these papers, there's no going back." I looked at her with the clearest vision I'd had in years. "Listen, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The first document was a new will, completely rewriting my previous one. The second was a power of attorney, revoking any future claims my family might try to make. And the third was a donation agreement that would make my children's heads spin. I decided to donate my entire estate, the house, the savings, the life insurance policy, everything, to the Phoenix Women's Shelter, an organization that helps elderly women who've been abused by their own families. The irony was perfect. My family's greed would end up helping other women who'd been betrayed by people they trusted most. I kept exactly enough money to live comfortably, plus a special fund for one specific purpose. I left each of my grandchildren exactly $1,000, enough to buy a nice funeral arrangement, which is about all the respect they'd shown me. But the real justice came when Elena filed criminal charges against all of them. Tyler was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. Sarah faced charges for bribery, fraud, and identity theft. Marcus was charged with conspiracy and making threats against my life. And Dr. Harrison? Well, let's just say the Arizona Medical Board was very interested in hearing about his $10,000 diagnosis deal. The fallout was swift and merciless. Dr. Harrison lost his medical license within 2 weeks. Tyler's gambling debts became public record. And Jimmy the Shark decided to collect his money from Tyler's mother instead. Sarah's real estate license was suspended, and when her clients found out she'd been using a fake business address, most of them sued her for fraud. Marcus had to confess everything to his wife Emma, who packed up and moved back to her mother's house in California, taking their newborn daughter with her. The court proceedings were like watching dominoes fall in the most satisfying way possible. Each of them tried to blame the others, creating a beautiful mess of finger-pointing and backstabbing. But Elena had recorded evidence of each of them actively participating, and the judge wasn't having any of their excuses. This court has rarely seen such calculated cruelty toward a family member, Judge Martinez said during sentencing. You didn't just attempt to steal from Mrs. Patterson. You attempted to steal her dignity, her independence, and her very identity. The final piece of justice came in the form of a restraining order. None of them were allowed to contact me, visit my home, or come within 500 feet of me. The day the order was served, I was sitting on my front porch with Rosa, drinking sweet tea and watching the sunset. "How do you feel, Mrs. Patterson?" Rosa asked me. I thought about it for a moment, then smiled the biggest smile I'd felt in years. "I feel free, Rosa, for the first time in decades. I feel completely free." 6 months after the court proceedings ended, I was standing in the lobby of the Phoenix Women's Shelter, cutting the ribbon for the new Margaret Patterson Wing, a specialized facility for elderly women escaping family abuse, when the local news reporter asked me how it felt to turn my betrayal into something positive. I looked straight into that camera and said, "Sweetheart, the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving that they underestimated the wrong woman." Rosa stood beside me, beaming with pride, now working as the wing's head nurse coordinator. The shelter director told me that my donation would help over 300 women each year, women who'd been discarded by their families just like I almost was. The money I'd kept for myself became the seed money for the most exciting chapter of my life. I used it to start a consulting business called Silver Sage Investigations, specializing in helping elderly people who suspected their families of financial abuse. Word spread quickly, and within 3 months, I had more clients than I could handle. My first case was helping a 78-year-old widower whose son was stealing his Social Security checks. By the end of the month, we had enough evidence to send that boy to prison for 2 years. My fake blindness had taught me skills I never knew I possessed: how to observe without being noticed, how to gather evidence, how to think like a detective. Turns out being underestimated was the best training I could have asked for. The house felt different now, filled with purpose instead of secrets. I converted my guest bedroom into a home office, complete with recording equipment and a wall full of certificates from the private investigator courses I'd taken online. Elena became my legal partner, and together we started a support group for elder abuse survivors that met every Thursday in my living room. The same room where my family had plotted my destruction became a place of healing and empowerment for dozens of women who'd been betrayed by their own children. Rosa moved into my garage apartment, and we became the dynamic duo of senior justice. My health improved dramatically. Once the stress was over, I started taking ballroom dancing classes, joined a hiking group for active seniors, and even learned to use social media to promote my business. My Instagram account became wildly popular among older adults, with over 50,000 followers who loved seeing a 72-year-old woman kicking butt and taking names. The most satisfying moment came exactly 1 year after the court case, when I received 3 separate letters from my grandchildren, all begging for forgiveness and asking if we could work things out. I read each letter carefully, then walked to my fireplace and burned them one by one. As I watched the flames consume their empty apologies, I felt nothing but peace. They'd had their chance to treat me with love and respect, and they'd chosen greed instead. Now they could live with the consequences forever. Looking back on this whole experience, I realized that my fake blindness gave me something far more valuable than evidence against my family. It gave me clarity about who I really was and what I was capable of achieving. At 72 years old, I discovered that I was braver, smarter, and more resourceful than I'd ever imagined. I learned that being underestimated is actually a superpower, that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really made of. My family thought they were stealing my future, but Instead, they gave me the greatest gift of all, the motivation to build a life so much better than the one they tried to destroy. And honey, let me tell you, this new life is just getting started. Well, dear, that was my story. At 72 years old, I learned that age is just a number when it comes to courage and determination. If my journey inspired you, give this a like and share it so more people can see that we should never underestimate the strength of an older person. In the comments, tell me which part of my story impressed you the most. And if you know someone who faced a similar situation, tag them to show they're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of extraordinary people who proved that age doesn't define our limits.